Fred Saxon. The Hare Krishna movement has long been famous for its chanting and dancing on the streets of America's largest cities. Infamous, perhaps, for its zealous book distribution at airports around the country. Long looked upon as kooks and beggars, ridiculed by the media, and scorned by the general public, the Krishnas say they are trying to change their image. They say they won't give up chanting or distributing their books, but they do want people to see them in a better light. And surprisingly, in at least one major American city, they may have succeeded. Detroit, not exactly your typical American city, but by giving birth to the automobile, it truly revolutionized the American way of life. In fact, it is impossible to imagine what this country would have been like without Detroit, without its automobiles, trucks, and farm machinery. And just as this one city has been so important in shaping the American destiny, there is one man who strongly influenced the shaping of Detroit: Henry Ford, the fiercely determined inventor of the mass-produced automobile. Henry Ford, with his dream of a car that every American could own.
Owned an automobile. He took his sweetheart for a ride last Sunday. He was dressed up in his best Sunday clothes. She nestled close to his side.
And if it is difficult for us to imagine the Motor City without Henry Ford and the Ford Motor Company, it is equally hard to imagine a Detroit without the United Auto Workers Union and this man, Walter Ruther. His dream was that the people who built the cars would be among those who could afford them. Ford and Ruther. Their violent battles are legend in Detroit. It has been many years since these two strong-willed men shared headlines in the nation's newspapers. Henry Ford died in 1947, Walter Ruther in 1970. By then, in 1869 was also the year that the Krishnas opened their first temple in Detroit, though at the time the troubled city scarcely noticed. And then suddenly, in 1972, the two biggest names in Detroit, Ford and Ruther, catapulted the Hare Krishnas into the city's consciousness with headlines like these. Henry Ford's great-grandson Alfred and Walter Ruther's daughter Lisa, now Krishna devotees and friends, working together for a common goal, the Krishna consciousness movement. For Detroit, it was like something out of a fairy tale, like a Khrushchev daughter marrying a Kennedy son. For the Krishnas, it was instant credibility. Alfred Ford and Lisa Ruther both acted as articulate and influential representatives for the Krishna movement in Detroit. But even more important was the avalanche of free publicity that was generated. Reporters and their viewers and readers were infatuated by the unlikely Ford-Ruther partnership. The follow-up stories and interviews continued for years, and it is a fascinating story. Before Alfred and Lisa became devotees, they'd never even met, and except for the famous feuds of their recent ancestors, they had virtually nothing in common.
What was he like, when you knew him? Was he
wild? When I was growing up, I never had any privacy. I resented the fact that I had to make so many sacrifices for my father and his career. But now I'm willing to make all sacrifices for Prabhupada because it's a transcendental process. And it's completely different. I mean, if I had to do this for some mundane reason, forget it. I'd be out in the mountains somewhere, in my blue jeans.
But most of the stories focused on the Ford and Ruther family histories, as we see in this recent NBC interview.
I mean, would they be turning over in their graves saying, what has happened to my children, or what? I mean, how do you think your great-grandfather, how do you think your father would view this?
I think my great-grandfather would think it was all right, it was pretty good, because he was very religious and very strict. He didn't allow ballroom dancing, cigarette smoking, drinking, whatever to go on in his house, and so that's what we're doing here. And also he was interested in reincarnation and what happens after death. So I think I'm simply just carrying on what he made his money to do.
Yeah, I'm sure my parents would both appreciate this very much. My parents had a very great appreciation for aesthetics, beauty, art, religion.
Despite the horrendous battles that took place between the two families.
These battles were a sociological event. They weren't personal. It wasn't that Henry Ford and my father hated each other. My father hated injustice. He hated exploitation of people, and he was fighting against that. He wasn't fighting against Henry Ford personally.
Are you, by way that he has been described as the type of man that he was to you, the way he was described to you, are you like him or unlike him? And if so, how?
I think I'm like him in that I'm sort of a maverick. I do what I want to do, even when it's very unpopular. And I think I'm like him also in that he was interested in mystical things. And I think there's a similarity there.
The automobile, you mean, was mystical back in those days?
No, but he was very interested in reincarnation and vegetarianism and spiritual life. So.
And always, as in this cable news report, there was the question, why?
Alfred, tell me, why would you leave a world of high finance, a car business, a car empire, no less, to become a Hare Krishna devotee?
Well, I became involved with the Hare Krishna movement through meeting my spiritual master, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And when I met Srila Prabhupada, I recognized him as a man who knew the absolute truth, and was very attractive to me.
What do you mean absolute truth?
The meaning of life, what life is all about, what life is for.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa had a similar reason for joining, as she tells People magazine.
Were you a vegetarian when you were young?
I was young, yeah. I became a vegetarian when I was about 16.
Why?
Because I didn't like to kill animals.
And then what was the transition then into to becoming a devotee?
Well, I read the books of our spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. I read them in college, but it didn't really make any sense.
Srila Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement and spiritual master of Alfred Ford and Lisa Ruther. To many Americans, just another cult leader. But others believe that he was an important religious teacher and scholar. His books, more than 80 in all, have been highly praised by a surprising number of people, including some of our most distinguished scholars.
He also did a very important work in introducing to the Western world for the first time the devotional philosophy of Sri Krishna Caitanya. Not only did he introduce these texts, but he introduced them in a way that was quite different from the other translations that had been made. I had read so many different translations, for example, of the Bhagavad Gita, which had all been interpreted from the impersonalist type of philosophy of the Advaita school. And here, you might say, for the first time was a truly devotional translation, a spiritual translation of the text, which I felt really came much closer to the true meaning and the purpose of the Bhagavad Gita.
Despite such critical acclaim, Srila Prabhupada and his Krishna consciousness movement have never been highly regarded by the general public in America. But in India, it's a very different story. The people of his own country have acclaimed Srila Prabhupada as the distinguished modern representative of one of India's oldest and most important religious traditions.
It's a very established religious system in India. Although we have one spiritual master, he's coming from a line of disciples that stretches back thousands of years, and the precepts of Krishna consciousness are based on principles that are thousands of years old.
This was something few Americans were aware of, the fact that Srila Prabhupada's spiritual heritage was as well known in India as Alfred Ford and Lisa Ruther's backgrounds were known in America. If Srila Prabhupada had been one of those modern get-rich-quick gurus, he would have probably taken Alfred and Lisa's money, bought a few dozen Rolls Royces, and put the rest into a secret Swiss bank account. Instead, Srila Prabhupada had, as the old Ford commercials used to say, a better idea. An idea that would eventually transform an entire neighborhood and perhaps gain establishment acceptance for the Krishnas here in Detroit.
Srila Prabhupada came here. He had heard, I think he was in Paris, and he had heard from the devotees there that Govardhan had found this fabulous building in Detroit. So he came here right away, and he came to the temple, the mansion, and he was so excited. He told Ambarish and myself, "You must buy this building immediately." So the next day, Ambarish knocked on the Brahmacharini ashram and asked for me, and we had to go, and I liquidated all my funds that I had inherited from my parents when they were killed, and I used it to buy the building, and then Ambarish paid for the other half.
Actually, our spiritual master, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who the center is named after, it was his idea to buy it. Actually, when I first saw it, and they asked me what I thought about it, I thought it was, I didn't like it at all, because I couldn't see the possibilities in it. The neighborhood was a lot worse than it is now. And the house was really gaudy, and I thought, and dark and gross, and I thought, geez, I don't know what we can do with this place. So, but his idea was, he said, buy it and turn it into a cultural center, you know, so it was his idea.
The Fisher Mansion, once an important landmark in Detroit, one of America's finest homes. An ornate Italian villa built 56 years ago by auto tycoon Lawrence Fisher, the founder of Cadillac Motors and the Fisher Body Company. Although it had cost millions to build in the 1920s, Alfred and Lisa bought the estate in 1975 for just $300,000. The reason? Over the years, this once posh neighborhood had become a poverty-ridden slum. In fact, statistically, it was ranked among the worst in the entire nation. A lot of people were worried about what would happen when the Hare Krishnas with their unusual lifestyle moved in. The Krishnas were also apprehensive, but they had their religious faith and confidence in the vision of their spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. They also worked hard to establish good relations with the community. They encouraged neighborhood improvement by offering tools and manpower to anyone that wanted to clean up or improve their homes.
My thoughts about it is they are very nice people. They're willing to help the neighbors around. When they cut the grass, they ask you, can they help cutting your grass? And when it was snowing, they helped me in my driveway that I could get up in the driveway. Anything that's helpful of using tools when you don't have tools, they're willing to help you in those lines.
Okay, well, since they've moved across the street, we hardly have any break-ins. I know my house was broken in 3 times before they moved in, but now we don't have any break-ins as much because they're walking the streets all times of the night and all times of the day. And I guess they help to look out for us, you know.
The city was impressed. Reassured by the credibility of the Ford and Ruther names, the city began to cooperate with the Krishnas, bulldozing several blocks that were beyond salvage, and erecting clean, new, low-cost housing and a modern vocational training center for the unemployed.
It's going to bring the neighborhood back up. Because the neighborhood had gone down. It's going to help to bring it back up.
In the meantime, the Krishnas were also fixing up their own place. It was to take 7 years and more than $2 million to transform the old mansion into the temple and cultural center that Srila Prabhupada had envisioned. The Krishnas themselves did most of the work, but most of the money came from Alfred Ford. Auto money had built the Fisher estate, and fittingly, it was auto money that restored it.
Prabhupada used to say wherever a man puts his money, that's where his mind is. And we all know that it's been a very consuming project as far as money goes, and also time and energy, you know. So in a way it was very maturing for me in my spiritual life because it was difficult. And we took a lot of wrong turns, you know, made a lot of mistakes, and up until this visit right now when I'm seeing, I still haven't been all that enthusiastic about it, but now I'm seeing that this is an incredible opportunity for preaching. But it really took a lot of perseverance and faith and trust that Prabhupada knew what was going to happen and that his vision was correct and more or less.
Srila Prabhupada passed away in 1977, only 2 years after the building was purchased. But the new leaders of the Krishna consciousness movement were determined to continue the Detroit project. One of them was Srila Vishnupad.
Oh yeah, you know, it's wonderful. I'm so faithless. You know, I think that's what Ambarish was referring to. We're all of so little faith that even though we've worked hard and we don't have that vision which Prabhupada had. The devotees were telling me that in 1975 Prabhupada would sit out on the back lawn and wave to the boats, you know, as they were passing by. And he told the devotees, this is the most important center in the United States. And they were telling me this last summer when I was here. I saw it's a nice place and it's a nice museum, but I still didn't have that vision, you know. And then just yesterday, this place has taken off like wildfire. I mean, the biggest media people have been chartering their own jets to fly in, NBC, National News, this one and that one, the Washington Post flying people in, the Chicago Tribune, the New York Times, and it's completely beyond our expectation, and it's completely beyond our dreams.
The center was formally opened on May 25th, 1983.
Yeah, anytime you're ready.
Mom, I'm with you. You don't believe me.
Leaders of the Krishna movement mingled with Detroit's elite. Among the distinguished guests, the Ford family and other wealthy and influential citizens. The Consul General of India, Mr. Verma, gave the keynote speech.
It is really a tribute to the great dedication, the devotion which members of the Society of the Bhakti Vedanta Cultural Center have for the teachings of Prabhupada, that they have done so much work, and the message of the Guru and of the Gita which the society is spreading is something which is of universal application. It is the message of love and of peace, and I really wish the society all success in its very noble endeavor, which I am sure will help people here to enrich their lives much greater and will bring India and the United States much closer together. Thank you very much.
There was a civic award from the Michigan State Senate.
Indeed, we are proud that the Lawrence P. Fisher Mansion and the Bhaktivedanta Cultural Center are available to the people of Detroit and any who visit what increasingly is a Renaissance city. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate that the grand opening of the Lawrence P. Fisher Mansion and the Bhaktivedanta Cultural Center be highly commended, and be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be transmitted to Alfred Ford and to Elizabeth Ruther Dickmeyer as a reflection of our regard. This was adopted by the Senate of Michigan on May 24th, 1983, and I'd like to present it on behalf of Senator Kelly.
The biggest round of applause, however, was reserved for the guests of honor, Alfred Ford and Lisa Ruther.
What the center is here for is we are trying to present to the people of Detroit and anybody who comes through the culture of ancient India, and this is a wonderful showplace for it. And so the center is for the people of Detroit. We hope that those who are here come back often and bring many friends, and you're more than welcome anytime to come and eat at the restaurant or discuss philosophy or wander in the gardens or just do whatever you want to here. And please tell your friends about it, and thank you all very much for coming.
Elizabeth.
Thank you very much for coming here tonight. As you know, the ancient Vedic culture of India is a very rich culture spiritually, and we feel by having this center here, we can actually help people understand the great deficit that they may be feeling in the materialistic culture here in America. We think that Krishna consciousness has a great deal to offer to people here, and we hope that you will learn to appreciate this culture by coming here.
Alfred and Lisa were smiling but visibly tired. It had been a day of non-stop interviews with the media, who had indeed turned out in force.
You know, I'm such a dyed-in-the-wool Baptist.
The media were there mainly because of the Ford-Ruther connection, but they also came because of the rich and famous past of the mansion itself. Before falling into disrepair, the magnificent 4.5-acre estate had been Detroit's most fabulous private residence. It was the scene of lavish Great Gatsby-style parties, complete with famous Hollywood stars. An exclusive pleasure dome for the seriously rich, with its own private waterway to the Detroit River, and 3 huge, intricately tiled boat wells. Lawrence Fisher and his guests could pull in on their 100-foot yachts and dock right inside the mansion. From there, they would pass through ornate doors and arches made of hand-carved wood imported from India and Africa. From the dining room, they could look out through handcrafted stained glass windows or look up at the exquisite chandeliers and coiffured hand-painted ceilings decorated with more than 75 ounces of gold and silver leaf. After dinner, they could freshen up in one of the many lavish bathrooms and then dance the night away on the inlaid marble floors of the grand ballroom. The Krishnas have recreated much of the original Roaring Twenties grandeur of the Fisher Mansion. But tourists will now find that the estate owes almost as much to India as to the auto industry. Today, visitors are greeted by sculptures of the incarnations of Krishna, strategically situated among the flowers and fountains of the formal gardens. Inside, there are more examples of Indian sculpture and art, many of them priceless treasures from the personal collection of Alfred Ford. And surprisingly, they seem to somehow blend in with the original decor. The result, as the Washington Post commented, makes the famous Hearst Mansion in San Simeon look like a Greyhound waiting room by comparison. The rooms themselves have been meticulously restored, but some of them now serve functions that would surprise the swinging auto magnate who originally built and used them. The billiard room, for example, is now a gallery whose art objects and cultural displays illustrate the ancient teachings of Indian philosophical thought. Fisher's master bedroom, with its gold leaf ceilings and Venetian silk drapes, now houses a memorial to the founder of the Krishna consciousness movement, Srila Prabhupada, who inspired the entire project. The elegant Rococo dining room, where Fisher and his elite guests enjoyed their opulent meals, has been opened to the public as a gourmet vegetarian restaurant. There is still dancing after dinner, just as there was in the old days, but now it's strictly of the devotional type and takes place in a 300-seat auditorium where the bowling alley used to be. In the grand ballroom, shoes are no longer permitted. It is now a temple room where Krishna devotees and interested visitors can attend the services that are held there 6 times a day. But it is downstairs in the boat wells where the most spectacular transformation has occurred. It is the centerpiece of the tour. One of the lavish boat wells has been preserved, but the other 2 now house a revolving stage, 7 slide projectors, a huge array of stereo speakers, and banks of computer-controlled spotlights, all part of an elaborate multimedia display that explains the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. It is called Fate, the first American transcendental exhibition. It is a remarkable combination of past and present, of modern technology and ancient tradition. One senses these ironic contradictions throughout the mansion, but nothing is more surreal than sitting here in Lawrence Fisher's Boatwell watching this high-tech presentation of the ancient religious teachings of India put together by Alfred Ford, Lisa Ruther, and the Hare Krishnas. Fortunately, the exhibit itself helps to make some sense out of all these contradictions. The first diorama explains that one's real identity has nothing to do with one's name or with the body in which they happen to be born.
The soul cannot be measured with any scientific instrument. Yet this minute, non-material entity, the soul, is so powerful that it unceasingly activates each body throughout its entire lifetime. This tiny little spark of life thus moves from one body to another. This is called reincarnation. It is not difficult to understand. Even in our own life, we live in different bodies. Medical science has demonstrated that all of our cells are replaced every 7 years.
The Krishnas believe that beyond the temporary illusions of the material world, there is a higher realm, the spiritual world. This is supposed to be the real province of the soul, and the abode of Krishna, the Supreme Soul. The devotees worship Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who descended on earth some 5,000 years ago from the spiritual world. Here, Krishna grows up in the forest village of Vrindavan with his brother Balaram and cowherd boyfriends. Residents of the Motor City, perhaps because of the abundant problems of their own environment, welcomed this vision of the spiritual world with considerable enthusiasm.
It was tremendous, very well done. It was beautiful.
What did you learn from it?
All about all this Hare Krishna. I never knew anything about it before. It's interesting.
It was magnificent. The multimedia production is outstanding. It really is.
I enjoyed it. It was excellent.
Oh, it's very impressive, I must say. And I'm glad that the center has come up, and I hope more and more people will visit it.
People were surprised at how much the Krishnas had accomplished.
I am mostly impressed with the young people who have taken the money and the material goods that have been given to them, and have neither squandered them nor just outright rejected them, but tried to bring together a center where people can appreciate and be exposed to their particular beliefs, where they can do some good in the world. And I think if everybody had the same kind of feelings, that the world would probably be a better place to live.
But despite these glowing opening night reviews, there is still the question of whether people will feel manipulated by the Krishnas, subtly seduced by this expensive exercise in public relations.
You don't quibble. This is essentially a propaganda tool, or you're using this to, if not seduce, certainly to attract people to learn more, this house, about the Krishna religion.
We're using this building just like the Catholic Church uses the Vatican, which is certainly a beautiful and very opulent building, and it attracts people to come there, and when they come there, they absorb the spiritual atmosphere, and that's what we're trying to do too, also with this building.
The Krishna's purpose here is clearly to spread their own beliefs, and the approach they are using is decidedly low-key.
We're trying to present the Vedic culture, its architecture and art, and the natural food, and then the multimedia exhibition, which is another aspect of the culture.
But you're not proselytizing. You're not trying to make converts here.
No. We're not into indoctrination. That's not our philosophy. We're into presenting Krishna consciousness as it is. Presenting the culture of ancient India, and you can walk away with whatever you want to take. If you want to take a lot, you take a lot. If you want to just take nothing, you don't have to take anything.
Alfred Ford.
Whether this new soft sell approach will be successful for the Krishnas in the long run remains to be seen. But it certainly seems to have worked wonders on the opening day visitors.
I'm impressed. I really am. I'm really impressed.
It's beautiful. We do most of the area tours that come into Detroit. So this is going to be a #1 stop for my company.
Professor J. Gordon Melton, director of the Institute for the Study of American Religions, is a long-time observer of the Krishna movement in America. He was also impressed.
It has been nice to see what I perceive as a real attempt to speak to the community, draw the community's attention to the movement, and to try to convey, communicate to the community what the movement is all about in the face of some very hostile images that are often conveyed in the public press.
The public press, they had never taken the Krishnas seriously, but this occasion seemed to mark something of a truce. The news reports themselves were nowhere near as unfavorable as they had been in the past.
Paper with inlaid pure gold. What's more, no one lives here. This is the fisherman.
The Hindu religion, which has gained a sizable following in the United States. Hare Krishna devotees wear long yellow robes, mostly shaved heads, and they favor tambourines. And now they have a place in the Detroit establishment.
A place in the Detroit establishment. Quite an accomplishment for a group as bizarre as the Hare Krishnas. But the question remains, why has the Detroit establishment so readily accepted this strange imported religion? Alfred Ford and Lisa Ruther obviously had a lot to do with it. The Ford-Ruther reconciliation had captured the city's imagination and provided just the symbol of peace and renewal that Detroit was looking for. On the other hand, it was clearly the Krishna movement and philosophy that had brought Alfred and Lisa together, and it was the Krishnas who were largely responsible for the new cultural center. Of course, it is possible that the city is just being polite. After all, they are getting a magnificently restored mansion, a vastly improved neighborhood, perhaps even a new tourist attraction. And yet, as we have seen, the prevailing mood is more than just polite. In fact, people here seem downright enthusiastic about the Hare Krishnas these days. In a recent letter to Lisa Ruther, the governor of Michigan, James Blanchard, said, "I hope that the restored Fisher Mansion and Bhaktivedanta Cultural Center will serve as a catalyst for renewal, not only physical, but spiritual. It may seem far-fetched, but perhaps this once wealthy city is realized in a way that economic success does not necessarily bring about social and cultural improvement, just as Alfred Ford and Lisa Ruther discovered that all their fame and wealth were no guarantee of happiness. Does this mean that we'll soon see some kind of grand spiritual renaissance here in Detroit? Well, it seems rather unlikely, of course, but then much of what has already happened here once seemed pretty unlikely too." From Detroit, I'm Fred Saxon.
Somebody